Oh my God.
I would request Dr. Rizwan to please confirm if the participants have joined.
Yeah, even we have joined. I'm glad to see the chairpersons are there online as well. And we still have 10 minutes to go before you. And thereafter, I would request Dr. Eckers to welcome the gathering before we introduce the chairpersons.
We also acknowledge the presence of head of the department of BJ Medical College and Civil Hospital, Ahmedabad, Dr. Nidhi Bhatnagar, amongst us. We thank ma'am for encouraging her residents to participate in this journal club presentation.
Thank you, Ekaj. Thanks a lot. Hope everybody likes it.
I'm sure we all will, ma'am. I can already see this big smile on Dr. Prasoon's face. He's all set to critique the journal club.
It's nice to see all of you after a long time.
So we are just waiting for 10 minutes. We officially start at 3:30. We have 10 minutes of, stolen conversations if you want to have it while we wait for the time to start. I received a issue from BJMC. Are we audible now?
Of course, Dr. Eckers, you're clearly audible.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all for joining us for this Young Professional Forum ISTM Academic Initiative, the second journal club in the month of November. I take this opportunity to welcome you all on the behalf of Young Professional Forum and on behalf of my entire team, Dr. Ankit Mathur, Dr. Abu Bakr Mohammad Rafi, Dr. Rizwan Javed, Dr. Puneet Jain, Dr. Suvro Datta, and myself. I would hand over the proceedings of today's journal club in the able hands of Dr. Rizwan Javed and Dr. Suvro Datta. Dr. Rizwan, over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Ekaj. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to host the second Young Professional Council Journal Club. And the honor is great because we have two distinguished chairperson along with one enthusiastic residents. So without much time, I would like to introduce Dr. Prashan Bhattacharya, who is the professor and head at the Department of Immunohematology and Blood Transfusion at Medical College, Calcutta. Sir, after completing his residency from Chandigarh, developed interest in expanding transfusion centers, both in quality and volume of services across the country. He has been an NABH assessor with the Quality Council of India and has a distinguished career of spanning across 20 years, which comprises of 17 years of postgraduate teaching and research, where he has guided 18 theses, postgraduate theses. To his credit, there are 30 national and international publications, and he has also been an investigator into 2 research projects. The most popular one of late has been the passive immunization with convalescent plasma in COVID-19. And his professional experience has been diverse in private and government sector. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Raj.
The second chairperson, Dr. Sushila Jacob, is the vice principal and professor and head of clinical lab and transfusion medicine at Jubilee Mission Medical College. After completing her master's from Trivandrum Medical College, ma'am has moved across different zones in India and abroad. She has been a joint director of blood safety at the Kerala chapter of AIDS Control Organization. And she's been a faculty and chairperson of several national conferences, as well as a research guide at the Kerala University of Health Sciences. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for taking time for us. I would now request the chairpersons to take the lead and introduce our first presenter for the day, Dr. Arvind.
Thank you, Doctor. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Aikaj and team, Dr. Rizwan, so kind to me, and Dr. Subha also. Thanks to all of you. Let me introduce the first speaker. Also, my thanks to Professor Nidhi Bhatnagar also. She's the mentor. So all of you, I express my gratitude. Now, I welcome Dr. Arvind Lakshmikandan. He is a third-year resident in the Department of Transfusion Medicine, Immunohematology and Blood Transfusion, BJ Medical College, Ahmedabad. Dr. Arvind, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. Good afternoon, one and all. My topic is freezing expired platelets does not compromise in vitro quality and opportunity to maximize inventory potential. So this study was done by Dr. Lacey Johnson and her team in Australia, and the study was published in Transfusion Journal in the month of March 2020. So a brief introduction, this room temperature storage limits the shelf life of the platelet concentrates between 5 to 7 days. So this leads to challenges in inventory management, paradoxical wastage due to expiry, and inability to supply platelets at certain times. And it also leads to difficulty in access of platelets in certain areas due to transport logs and unpredictable requirements.
Earlier suggestion of preserving.
Dr. Arvind, we cannot see your slides.
One minute, sir.
I think the slide is not in PowerPoint.
While we wait for the slides to restart, I would like to remind everybody that they can fill the link given in the chat to get certificates for participation in this journal club. Please, I will post the link again. Just fill this link and submit. Those who submit this link will get a participation certificate for this webinar, which will be officially issued by Young Professional Forum and ISTM. It's in your chat box now. At your convenience during the whole hour, please fill this form. Over to you, Rizwan.
I think the slides are back and I think they're moving now. So we can proceed. Sorry for the hiccup and let's begin. Dr. Arvind, over to you.
Sorry for the inconvenience. A brief introduction about this. Room temperature storage limits the shelf life of platelet concentrates to between 5 and 7 days. It leads to challenges in inventory management, paradoxical wastage due to expiry, and inability to supply platelets at certain times. And also it leads to difficulty in access of platelets in certain areas and during unpredictable clinical requirements. To overcome this, there is an attractive alternative to room temperature storage is platelet cryopreservation. They preserve the platelets in 5 to 6% of dimethyl sulfoxide and frozen and stored at -80 degrees Celsius. This leads to extend the shelf life of platelets up to 2 years. Globally, the method of preservation differs, but there is consistency in time of freezing. They used to freeze the platelets. But if we are freezing the platelets within 2 days of collection, we have some difficulties, like it will reduce the available liquid storage platelets. And if any unpredictable supply comes, it is difficult to face those demands. If platelets could be cryopreserved later in usable shelf life following storage at room temperature, it would maximize the utility as they could be available for standard transfusion. And if we are not using those platelets, we can freeze the platelets in a future. So here comes the aim of the study. The aim of the study was to assess the quality of platelets frozen at or approaching expiry compared to the platelets frozen according to standard protocol. The methods they used are platelet collection and sampling, laboratory analysis, and statistical analysis. In platelet collection and sampling, whole blood donations were collected from eligible voluntary non-remunerated donors. For platelet preservation, 4 Buffy coats were pooled with the platelets additive solution and separated with centrifugation and extraction with an automated press. These platelets were suspended in 30% of plasma and 70% additive solution. They were leukoreduced and stored in PVC bags. On the day 1 following collection, 2 AVO matched platelet concentrates were pooled and split to produce matched pairs. And these platelets randomly selected for study group and control group. So study group is expired cryopreserved platelets and control group is cryopreserved platelets, which is preserved on the day 1. Cryopreserved platelets were sampled for pre-freeze testing and then frozen immediately. Where XPP, which is going to act as a study group, were stored for 5 to 6 days in constant agitation at room temperature. Then they were sampled for pre-freeze testing and frozen immediately. For cryopreservation, they use 27% dimethyl sulfoxide with normal saline added to achieve a final concentration of 5 to 6%. Then those platelets were hyper concentrated to 25 ml by centrifugation, and supernatant was removed and frozen at minus 80 degrees Celsius. These cryopreserved platelets were stored at minus 80 degrees Celsius for 2 months until thawed. The platelets were thawed in a 37 degrees Celsius water bath for 4 minutes, agitated for 15 minutes at room temperature. Thawed platelets were reconstituted in a unit of freshly thawed whole blood derived plasma by sterile welding and resuspended with a gentle mixing. Then comes the laboratory analysis. Platelet count was done by hematology analyzer, pH measured with pH meter at room temperature. Visual examinations for swelling and macroaggregates are done by holding the units up to a light source. Microaggregates was measured by flow cytometry. Then platelet supernatant. This platelet supernatant, they collected it by centrifugation at 1600 gravity for 20 minutes, followed by 12,000 gravity for 5 minutes at room temperature, and they frozen it at minus 80 degrees Celsius. Then with the supernatant, they measured P-selectin, RNTS, and the platelet factor 4 by using ELISA. Platelet surface phenotype and microparticle release was assessed by flow cytometry. For microparticles and platelet surface receptor phenotype, they dilute the platelet to 300 into 10 to the power 9 per liter in Thyroid's buffer and stain for 20 minutes. These are the following markers they used for platelet surface phenotypes and microparticles. For phosphatidylserine exposure was determined by staining 1 into 10 to the power 6 platelets with annexing 5 FITZ in calcium containing buffer for 15 minutes. The absolute number of CD61 annexin 5 plus microparticles was enumerated using tubes containing defined number of beads. Platelet clotting potential also measured using thromboelastography. Method, they diluted the platelet to 200 into 10 to the power 9 per liter in plasma, recalcified and kaolin activated before addition to a plain cup. Then comes the result. Volume and platelet content were equal at the time of freezing. pH of the expired platelets were significantly higher. In thawed platelets, platelet content and post-thaw recovery were higher in units frozen at X compared to the control. No aggregates were seen macroscopically in any units upon thawing. Microaggregates were significantly higher in CPP units than expired units. Here the table shows the platelet concentrate before freezing and after thawing. So CPP which is a control group, which is, shows pH of 7.04, and the expired CPP shows 7.16, shows a little increase in pH level. But both groups shows swelling. There is a presence of swelling in both of the groups. After cryopreservation and thawing of platelets, there is no swelling is present in both of the groups, and microaggregates is little bit higher in the control group. So there is no difference in pre-freeze phenotype of CPP or expired CPP platelets. There was a reduction in the portion of platelet expressing GP2B, GP1B alpha and GP6 following cryopreservation. The loss was equivalent in both groups. The percentage of platelets with surface expression of CD62P and phosphatidylserine increased following cryopreservation in both. An increase in microparticles are detected following cryopreservation, but timing of freezing did not impact the number of microparticles generated. So here author represented in a graphical chart. Here author represented pre-freeze room temperature stored CPP with the gray circles and study group with the red squares. Here we can't see much difference with GP2B and GP1B alpha, but there is a little bit reduction in the GP6 expression, and P-selectin level, phosphatidylserine level, and microparticles levels are increased after the cryopreservation in both of the groups. Next, an increase in soluble mediators such as P-selectin, RNTS, and PF4 was observed in the supernatant during platelet storage in room temperature in expired CPP. Cryopreservation resulted in increase in these three proteins in control group, but only P-selectin is increased in study group. Interestingly, the concentration of RNTS and platelet factor 4 in the study group was similar before and after cryopreservation. So this table depicts the cytokine concentration in the cryopreserved platelets. Here we can see the platelet which is acting as a control group got increased after cryopreservation. But in a study group, only P-selectin level got increased, and the RNTS level and the platelet factor 4 level not much much difference between between pre-freeze and post-thaw level. The length of storage did negatively affect platelet function. The responsiveness of platelets to ADP stimulation was assessed by measuring PAC1 binding. There was a reduction in agonist responsiveness during storage at room temperature for up to 6 days. There was no exacerbation of loss of agonist responsiveness for expired CPP after cryopreservation. In TEG, the R time was reduced by cryopreservation, but the length of storage time had little impact. The kinetics of clot development and strength of clot formed were not affected by storage at room temperature. Again, this graph shows ADP induced PAC1 level, the agonist level to the platelet, which got reduced after cryopreservation, and R time also in thromboelastography, R time level also got reduced after cryopreservation. Coming to the discussion, the cryopreservation of platelets gives the opportunity to stockpile platelets for future use, may result in shortage of liquid stored platelets if unanticipated demands for platelet components occur. But in vitro quality indicators of CPPs are not adversely affected by freezing platelets following room temperature storage for their usable shelf life. The post-thaw recovery was actually improved in the units that were expired at the time of cryopreservation. Cryopreservation is known to result in the loss of proportion of platelets due to cryo damage, and author hypothesis that the higher post-thaw recovery observed in study group may be related to the reduced formation of microaggregates in these components. Microaggregate formations may be mediated by activated GP2B3A receptor has been shown in cold stored platelets. The activability of GP2B3A before freezing was reduced in study group and was strongly associated with the improved post-thaw recovery. Cryopreserved platelets have specific phenotypic changes. Mainly these changes are due to cryo injury. The cryo injury includes loss of certain glycoproteins, an increase in activation markers, release of microparticles, and reduction in the clotting time. The platelet frozen after collection or following room temperature storage for 5 days were almost indistinguishable in relation to these post-thaw quality parameters. So, cryopreserved platelets units have been shown to contain higher concentration of alpha granules associated proteins in the supernatant compared to liquid storage platelet components. No increase in RATS and platelet factor 4 was observed between pre-freeze and post-thaw conditions in the expired CPP group, may be due to release of these mediators during the longer period of room temperature storage before cryopreservation. Thus, this leads to the reduced level of internal store available in the post-thaw release. In future, CPPs could represent one component in a multi-product inventory where the choice of product is dictated by individual patient requirement. May be reserved for actively bleeding, particularly in location where it is not available. The ability to freeze platelets at the end of the usable shelf life rather than a start would enable the continued supply of liquid storage platelets and prevent wastage of the platelets. Limitations in these studies are only limited to in vitro parameters, and clinical studies will be required to confirm the value of approach. In some countries where platelets stored for 7 days at room temperature have no studies suggesting that to take it as a starting material for cryopreservation. Here I am going to conclude that these data demonstrate that delaying cryopreservation does not negatively impact the in vitro platelet quality parameters assessed in this study. Freezing platelets towards the end of their usable shelf life may facilitate stockpiling of CPPs in time of excess without placing additional pressure on the donor pool. And here I would like to thank YPF team for giving me the opportunity to present. On behalf of our team, we are wishing you very prosperous and wonderful happy Diwali. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind. I think now it's over to Dr. Rijwan.
Thank you. I think we should invite the second speaker, Dr. If you're ready to upload your slides. And I would request Dr. Sushila to introduce the second presenter for the day, and then we can have the question and answer session at the end of both the presentations with the permission of the chairs.
Yep. The second speaker is Dr. Ashley Monson Matthew from BJ Medical College, Ahmedabad. And I would like to thank the faculty of BJ Medical College for giving an opportunity for their PGs or actively participating in the YPF's program. You can start, Ashley.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, one and all. First of all, I would like to thank the entire YPF team for giving me this opportunity to present here, and also to Nidhi Bhatnagar ma'am for choosing this topic for me.
Can you please make it full screen?
Okay.
Can you make the slide full screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Here, click here.
Now I'm going to discuss on the topic red cell genotyping in chronic transfusion therapy. The article titled, How Do I Incorporate Red Cell Genotyping to Chronic Transfusion Therapy was published in the AABB Journal Transfusion Volume 3 January 2020 edition. Actually, this is an article based on a transfusion therapy program which was set up in a children's hospital in the US state named Minnesota. The authors are Nancy L. Van Buren, Jed B. Golling, Susan Corby, and team from the Innovative Blood Resources St. Paul and Children's Hospital and Clinics of Minnesota, Minneapolis. Coming to the introduction, why there is a need for red cell genotyping. As we all know, accurate phenotype of RBCs is difficult in transfusion-dependent patients like thalassemia patients and sickle cell anemia patients. Determination of blood group polymorphisms at the genomic level facilitates the resolution of clinical problems which are not addressed by the statistical methods. And over the 20 years, molecular basis of all major blood group antigens have been determined. And the primary aim of all these is to provide the best matched antigen RBC unit to the patient with least risk of alloimmunization. Now coming to some useful applications of red cell genotyping in transfusion medicine. As we all know, in fetal DNA typing are using genotyping, and for extensive blood group typing of donors for alloimmunized patients, and for blood group typing of a recently transfused patients, and for screening donors for rare blood group phenotypes, and to assess the frequency of blood group polymorphisms in population, and to determine RSDs fathers of fetuses at risk of hemolytic disease of fetus, and finally for blood group typing of patients with autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Now coming to the article, first of all, background. Children with transfusion-dependent anemia such as sickle cell disease and thalassemia are at increased risk of developing red cell alloantibodies due to their lifelong need for transfusion therapy. With the advent of genotyping, extended RBC antigen typing can be incorporated into chronic transfusion therapy programs to improve patient care and to provide antigen-matched blood. Coming to transfusion sickle cell anemia, in the article it is mentioned that in previous studies, the reported prevalence of alloimmunization in sickle cell disease patients ranges from 18 to 37% to 2 to 5% among all transfusion recipients. And this increased alloimmunization is associated with number of donor exposures, and the differences in the distribution of blood group antigens among the patients and donors. And in this current study setting, majority of the patients belong to African American ancestry. Mostly they are blacks, and they are having more RBC antigen variants. And majority of the donors are Caucasian. So obviously there will be differences in the distribution of blood group antigens. And in another study, it is cited that even after serological matching, RH alloimmunization was reported in 45% of chronically transfused patients and 12% of episodically transfused patients. In thalassemia patients, the reported prevalence of alloimmunization is from 5% to 47.5%. And the CDC reported 23% alloimmunization among THAL patients in US state itself. And the most commonly detected alloantibodies are anti-capital E, anti-capital C, and anti-capital K antibodies. Now coming to the study setting, the study is conducted in the Children's Hospital and Clinics of Minnesota in Minneapolis. It is a 381-bedded tertiary care children's hospital with a comprehensive cancer and blood disorder center. There, the transfusion service performs more than 5,200 blood type and antibody screening annually and provides more than 4,600 RBC units. The immunoreference lab performs antibody identification for the patients with a positive antibody screen, and all the first-time donors are type 4 RH antigens, capital C, small c, and E antigens, and they type donors by serological methods for other blood group antigens also. With the implementation of genotyping in the year 2016, they are carrying out around 3,000 donor genotyping annually of all ethnicities. Initially, they focused only on group O donors, and later they expanded the program to include group A and B donors so as to reduce the depletion of their ORH negative reserve. Local foundations support the cost of genotyping of all the new RBC donors. Now coming to the role of blood center. Actually, this transfusion therapy program was implemented years back, like almost 20 years back. In 2016, they revised the program with the implementation of RBC genotyping, targeting 29 genetic polymorphisms and 53 alleles to predict 37 antigens in 10 blood group systems. The current assay is an FDA licensed platform which has permission for both patients and donors. Now coming to the study design and methods. Initially, they developed a chronic transfusion therapy program for children requiring long-term transfusion support. Genotyping was performed at entry to find the patient RBC antigen type. Then limited versus extended antigen matching of transfusions were provided. Now coming to a flow chart of process for patients enrolled in the program. This flow chart is taken from the article itself. As you can see, initially the patient will be enrolled in the program at their first visit. The common genotype panel will be there. Once the panel results are out, the results will be entered into the laboratory information system, and the blood requirements will be entered in the blood bank file. In the reference lab, if a variant or weak or a discordant antigen is detected, then only further testing is done. Otherwise, no further testing is needed. And if such a variant antigen detected is suspected to be from RH system, then they will do additional RHCE testing. And if a D variant is suspected, then they will perform additional RHD testing also. And if the suspected antigen is not from RH system, they will do gene sequencing of that specific allele only. And in the transfusion service center, if the patient is found to be antibody screening positive, then this patient sample will be collected 1 to 3 days prior to transfusion, complete workup and obtain compatible blood. And this patient will be given extended antigen matched RBC units. And if the patient is antibody screening negative, the patient sample will be collected on the day of transfusion. And this patient will be given CEK matched or limited matched RBC units. And if this antibody screening negative patient is found to be positive during any period during the therapy time, this patient will be considered in the first category, where the patient will be called for sample collection 1 to 3 days prior to transfusion for workup. As I have mentioned, prophylactic antigen matching are types: limited matching and extended matching. In limited matching, they do CEK matching, that is capital C small c and capital E small e from RH system, and K antigen from KEL system are matched. In extended matching, they along with CEK, they do Duffy A, Duffy B, KID A, KID B, and capital S and small s antigen from MNS system also. Now coming to the results. After the revision of the program in the year 2016, 50 patients were enrolled. Among them, 20 were having sickle cell disease, 23 were thalassemia patients, and rest 7 were having other inherited anemias. And over the course of 3 years, 643 transfusion events were reported and 1096 units were transfused. Among the 20 sickle cell disease patients, 19 were having HBSS disease and 1 with HBSC disease. And among the 23 thalassemia patients, 12 were having beta thalassemia, 6 with alpha thalassemia, and 4 with HBE beta thal, and 1 with HBAE Bart's constant. And among the 7 patients with other inherited anemias, 5 were having diamond blackfan anemia, 1 with sideroblastic anemia, and 1 with severe hereditary spherocytosis. Now coming to the characteristics of patients in chronic transfusion therapy program, the age range was between 1 to 20 years of age, and among the 50 patients, 20 were males and 27 were females, and 46 on 50 patients were having history of previous transfusions. That is 94%. Of the study population already had history of previous transfusion. The table is from the article which shows these details, and it is also it has also the age range at initiation of transfusions, that is average range is 0 to 14 years, and age range at enrollment in the program, the average is around 1 to 19 years. Now coming to the antibodies detected and identified in the program, among the 20 sickle cell disease patients, 6 patients were found to have RBC alloantibodies at enrollment itself, and 2 patients were found to develop antibodies after enrollment. And 1 among them was a patient who developed warm autoantibody without any clinical symptoms or any other detectable alloantibodies, whereas the second patient was a non-RH positive patient who had previously detected anti-capital E antibody, and he developed severe transfusion reaction following transfusion and was found to have anti-D antibody. And later RHD genotyping was done and was found to have a hemizygous variant of RHD. And among the 23 thalassemia patients, 3 patients were having RBC alloantibodies at enrollment itself. No new antibodies were detected in thalassemia and inherited anemias after enrollment. This table shows the same regarding the antibodies detected and identified. As I've mentioned, 1 warm autoantibody was developed after the enrollment, and 1 anti-D was found to develop in a patient with anti-E. And among the thalassemia patients, 3 patients were already having RBC alloantibodies, and all 3 were having anti-capital E, and 1 had anti-capital E with anti-KIT A. Now coming to the variant alleles detected, 7 patients were found to have variant alleles, and all the 7 patients were sickle cell disease patients. And 6 sickle cell disease patients were found to have variant RHCE alleles, 2 were having homozygous variants, and 4 with variants along with a wild type allele. And 1 sickle cell disease patient had a variant, hemizygous variant RHD, which was detected after the patient developed a hemolytic transfusion reaction. And 1 patient with homozygous RHCE developed a warm autoantibody without any underlying alloantibody. And this patient was started on prophylactic hydroxyurea therapy to prevent the, to reduce the use of more transfusions in the future. And 1 patient with RHCE variant had a novel JK allele associated with weak expression of KID A and silencing of KID B. And this is the table showing the same. Here you can see 2 patients who were detected to have partial small e antigen was found to develop anti-small e antibodies, and also 1 patient with partial small c and e antigen was found to have anti-capital S antibody also. Now coming to discussion. From this study, the advantages of RBC genotyping they found were workup got simplified when a new antibody is detected, and this genotyping provides a reliable and a cost-effective prediction of RBC genotype. And they say that genotyping predicts RBC phenotype for 37 antigens at a comparable cost of phenotyping 6 to 8 antigens by serological methods. And also a rapid provision of antigen negative units with the help of extensive genotyping of donors. Provision for extended matched RBC units provides an alternative to performing repeat RBC adsorption, saving turnaround time and cost. And genotyping also detects common weak and partial antigens, also helps in detection of variant antigen detection. And two examples they cited are partial capital C antigen, which is found to be a high prevalent antigen in their study setting. These patients are at risk of developing anti-capital C, so these patients should be given only C negative units. And another example is Duffy B negative phenotype with GATA mutation. These patients are not at risk of developing anti-Duffy B, so these patients can be given even Duffy B positive units also. And also with the help of genotyping, we can type antigens with no commercial reagents available, like Dombrok antigens, Dombrok A and Dombrok B, which are a common or high prevalent antigen in their study setting. After reviewing their program, they implemented several measures to improve their own program. One among them was expanding the program to include more patients, like congenital anemia patients and patients with blood dyscrasias affecting the erythroid lineage, and AIHA patients, that's autoimmune hemolytic anemia patients who will have more complex antibodies in their serum. And they also introduced advanced notification of transfusion center for future transfusions. They made a chronic transfusion therapy antigen negative blood form, which has mandatory columns to be filled by the physician, which includes details about previous transfusion, current status of the patient, and need for future transfusion, including the date for planned transfusion, so that the blood center can make arrangements for that particular antigen negative unit by the time of requirement. And they also developed a genotype summary report and a blood transfusion card, which includes detail about the genotype panel done for the patient and the antigen antibody identified along with transfusion recommendations. And this helps in inter-facility sharing of transfusion records if the patient goes to another hospital for transfusion. And also they highlights the requirement for additional gene sequencing in cases where discrepancy arises in serological studies, especially in RHD and RHD cases, because they already missed a case of partial D, where the patient developed a severe hemolytic anemia and required a long hospitalization for recovery. So this is the patient card with antibody and antigen information. As you can see, the name of patient is included in the front portion, antibody identified, and the recommendations for transfusion also included in the front side. And on the back side, RBC genotype information is given. Now coming to the drawbacks of the program, they themselves cited two drawbacks of their program, that ABO or D antigen testing is not included in common test methodology for patients, and RHC and RHD genotyping are not done for donors. And another drawback which I felt is the technical methods are not included in the study, that they never mentioned the methods of genotyping or how they followed it. They never mentioned anywhere in this study. Now coming to the conclusion, this article demonstrates how a chronic transfusion therapy can be developed in a community hospital via collaboration between clinical care team, blood supply and hospital laboratory, and how to incorporate RBC antigen genotyping to predict antigen types to detect variant antigens, thereby to reduce the risk of alloimmunization, and allows consideration of transfusion strategy for providing a prophylactic antigen matched blood to the patient. That's all. Thank you so much, and wish you all a very happy Diwali on behalf of the Department of IHBT, BJ Medical College. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for the wonderful presentation. The floor is open for questions and comments, which would be taken with the approval of the chairpersons.
Dr. Prasoon.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Yes, I must thank both of the speakers and the mentors for their excellent presentation. The first article, which was related to conservation of the platelets and describe preservation. It's an excellent article, and both the and also second article, which is related to chronic transfusion, both of them are relevant at the present days. So now I request any question from the audience related to matter. My thanks to Dr. Shushila also. Madam, any from
Can I just ask Dr. Ashley, can you give a critical review in a nutshell? Can you just mention what was the study based on and what is your opinion? Your opinion. You can tell your opinion about the study. Am I audible or not audible?
Yes,
Ma'am,
you
you're audible now.
Ma'am, actually this study is conducted in a children's hospital. But the sample size of the study population were only 50 patients, and they couldn't include all the patients enrolled for chronic transfusion therapy. They just included few sickle cell anemia, selected thalassemia patients like that. And
What is the difference between Indian situation and American situation? Like, what about the population in India and in America? Is there any difference between that?
yeah, the antigen distributions will be different, ma'am. In their study setting, more African Americans are there, but unlike our Indian population, and their RBC antigen distribution will be entirely different from ours, and also the antigen prevalence will be different among them and when compared to us.
Because they have a very population. In India, it's more of a homogeneous population, whereas when you go to USA, they have different categories like blacks, Asians, everyone is there. So I think more of antibodies, the likelihood of more antibodies is there than in India, because it's very high, like up to 37%.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Ashley, there's a question for you where somebody has asked why statistical analysis has not been taken in your study. Would you like to answer that question?
So मैम ने पूछी પછી ફોરેસ્ટ में નીકળી ગયા તો मैं फिर क्वेश्चन पूछूं.
There is no control.
Hi, Risman sir.
Yeah, there
Actually,
is.
the sample size is so small analysis, and there is no broad group also.
The second question for you is, what is the cost effectiveness of RBC genotyping versus phenotyping in providing antigen matched PRBC?
Actually, they say genotyping is really cost effective, and they mentioned in the article doing genotyping can predict the RB phenotype for the 37 alleles, which they included in their genotyping panel. At the comparable rate of phenotyping, only 6 to 8 RBCs by serological methods.
I have one question for both of you, Dr. Arvind and Dr. Ashley. In both your respective studies which you have presented, you have actually brought out methods which can be clinically applied and be very cost effective because they are relevant problems in the Indian scenario as well. What are the practical challenges that you think would come in the way of its implementation in our scenario? And how would you like to overcome in case if you want to actually implement both these conclusions? Both of you one by one, if you could take that question.
First, for cryopreservation of platelets, to measure the recovery of the platelets, we need different tests and different equipments. So for our setup, having difficulty in having those tests in Indian setup. And second thing is we ethical approval. We want ethical clearance is required for these two this cryopreservation. So these two things are read in my talk.
I have a little one thing to add. The thing is, when you are presenting the study on the cryopreservation, one thing it is interesting observation you mentioned, that is the absence of the swirling phenomenon. So if the swirling is absent, it signifies the viability of the platelets. So in this context, what you suggest in the preservation of the platelets, if cryopreservation? So the platelets are they will be viable for the long time, or they'll be for the immediate use?
Actually, the author mentioned that the viability is not much differ between both groups. Control group and study group, both are showing equal viability. There is no much difference in viability of the platelets.
Okay. Because normally it's a very useful tool we use at the bedside to check for the swirling.
Yes, sir. Actually, the study limited there. The limitation is that it is not get into clinical test still. Only in vitro results we have, sir.
Okay.
To get regulatory approval will be more difficult. In India,
Yes, ma'am.
is done, approved by the regulatory authorities. It may take years.
Yeah, Dr. Bharat has just shared his experience where he said we have experienced that after missing Rh phenotype, KEL negative blood to thalassemia children, the sensitization has tremendously reduced. Dr. Ashley, would you like to take a comment, answer that question? The application of use of red cell genotyping in the Indian scenario for chronic transfusion therapy, the challenges that you think of?
Yes, actually, I feel it will be really useful for us to add it to our routine serological methods. It can really help to prevent the rates of alloimmunization and transfusion reaction among patients here. But there are limitations, cost effectiveness, and like for implementation, we need more ethical clearance and everything, infrastructure, and also skilled technicians also for the same. So now I don't think we follow this everywhere, but there are few institutions where genotyping is done. So we can make it to a bigger extent in the coming years, hopefully.
Dr. Rajbir has a comment to make. Dr. Rajbir, could you please go ahead and make your comment?
Hi, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So basically, my comment is not related to today's studies or session. Basically, I want to congratulate the whole team of Young Professional Forum for making this forum available to everybody present miles apart, and especially our junior residents and trainees in transfusion medicine. So they are able to get a lot of benefit from these sessions. My JRs, my trainees, they are always finding it useful in day-to-day routine practices in the department. And the beautiful thing about this forum is it is first of its own kind online platform, which is connecting all of us and helping us to clear our doubts by sitting miles apart. And so again, congratulations to whole team, and Dr. Arvind, Dr. Ashley, you presented beautifully. Keep it up. And here my JRs are also there. So I will call my JR, Dr. Bhuvandeep. He's a second year JR attending all the sessions till now. So we'll be saying some words for YPF initiative. Dr. Bhuvan.
Hello. Hello.
Bhuvan, you are audible.
Yeah. I'd like to thank for this opportunity. Since our academics are already suffering a lot because of the current situation, so this has actually helped us a lot. And this is these sessions have been very helpful for us. And I'd also like to thank the whole YPF team for this great opportunity for us. And and through this actually we have been able to come to know about the how all across India how things are being going on. So thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Thanks, Dr. Bhuvan. So my second junior resident, she's third year JR, Dr. Mehak. She's also here to present her views about this initiative taken by YPF. Dr. Mehak?
Yes, good evening to all. I am Dr. Mehakdeep Kaur, third year junior resident from Government Medical College and Hospital, Chandigarh. And I am highly thankful to the YPF team for these excellent sessions in which we are able to learn several key pieces of information, which are not only improving our knowledge, but are also helping us work better in our field. So yes, these are highly recommended. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mehak. Thank you, Dr. Rizwan, for giving us opportunity to share our views about this forum. Thank you to the whole team of YPF for taking this initiative beautifully and leading this so, I must say, beautiful. It's just beautiful effort. Thank you so much,
Dr. Rajni, for your encouraging words. Thanks a lot. And I would also like to invite as well as thank Dr. Shurvo, who is co-hosting with me and has been mute throughout because he speaks less anyways. So I would ask him to.
Okay, so this is Dr. Shubhro, and from the behalf of YPF, I would like to thank both of our respected chairpersons, and and I will request the chairpersons for the concluding comments to our participants, if they want to say something finally to our two of today's participant.
So let me thank YPF. Actually, I should congratulate YPF for the initiative they have taken to start this program, which is every day it's on dot time, starting at 3:30, finishing before 4:30. So it's actually a very nice part where you do something, you keep to the time, you stick to the time, and interesting presentations are there. And so congratulations for that. And I thank you for making me the chairperson. But a little note to the participants who are doing the journal presentation. I think they should present the journal as well as add a critical review of the journal they are presenting. So that then only they'll understand what they are reading from the journal, and if there is something, there is a criticism about the journal, they can do that. If not, starting from the title, you can have a critical review of the journal. So thanks a lot. Thanks, Aikaj. Thanks, Rizwan, and thanks, Subro.
Thank you, the IPF team. It's an excellent and it's an opportunity for all of us to attend such interesting journals as well as other seminars too. Thank you.
Thanks to both of the chairpersons, and thanks to the participants for excellent presentation. And I would also like to thank the audience for their patience hearing. And let me announce the next webinar that is on next Wednesday, and that will be presented by Dr. Dibjot Singh, and that will be on TRIM and GVHT. So we'll see you in the next week. So happy academics from the behalf of YPF. Thank you everyone for your patience.
Thank you all.